So I'm going to do some more reading from this book that belonged to my grandfather. It's called Through Indian Eyes. I started not flipping through it, I read a little bit before. This is just a page that he had in it. So I think I was just gonna start at the top. It says, men say that the world was made by Raven. He is a man with a raven's beak. When the ground came up from the water, it was drawn up by Raven. He speared down into it, brought up the land and fixed it into place. The first land was a plot of ground, hardly bigger than a house. There was a family in a house there, a man, his wife, and their little son. This boy was Raven. One day he saw a sort of bladder hanging over his parents' bed. He begged his father for it again and again, but his father always said no, until he finally gave in. While playing, Raven broke the bladder and light appeared. We better have night too, said the father, not just daylight all the time. So he grabbed the bladder before the little boy could damage it further, and that is how day and night began. Inuit creation story. On the side here it says, as if swimming in a quiet pond, a polar bear seems to poke its head above the pool of sea mammal oil used in the stone lamp from Kodiak Island, Alaska. It was made between 500 BC and AD 500. So that's this. That's the only picture there. The creation of day and night is the far north. No, the creation of day and night in the far north did not carry with it a guarantee that they would follow each other in the same balanced, moderate intervals as they did elsewhere. The Arctic was and is a realm of excesses in its extraordinary lengths of darkness and light, its depths of cold, and the lack of variety in its plant life. Excessive also was its wealth and variety of animals. The northern rim of the continent featured the richest possible array of sea mammals, seals, whales, walrus, to say nothing of fish and shellfish of many kinds. The tundra marshes attracted enormous numbers of breeding birds and waterfowl each spring and summer. The coast had myriad seabirds, the interior ptarmigan. In addition, there were caribou and muskox, polar bears, and a profusion of smaller animals, down to mice-like voles. In short, a vast storehouse of sustenance for anyone with the skills, courage, and perseverance to exploit it. Learning to survive in the exceedingly harsh conditions of the Arctic, the ancestors of today's northern peoples seem to have passed on their posterity as surprising but unmistakable social trait. They shunned hierarchies. Great chiefdoms and stratified societies arose in gentler regions where perhaps nature was more forgiving of a mistake in judgment or hunting tactics. In the far north, where the environment presented dangers on a daily basis, egalitarian societies seem to have had the edge. Where there was less margin for error, each person remained responsible for his or her own actions. If most immigration proceeded across Beringia, then most immigrants passed through the Arctic on their meandering way to temperate latitudes. The remains of ancient residents that have been found in the Arctic generally date a few thousand years after the Clovis period, as if all the early venturers continued south, leaving vacant space for late immigrants who came this way. For these and other reasons, it seems likely that the forebears of modern Inuit and Aleut peoples were in the last wave of migrants from Siberia. Hold on, let me see how old this book is. I mean, it was my grandfather, so it's surely quite old. Where is it? Yeah, 1995. So, yeah, this is from the 90s. Some of these newcomers showed amazing stability. One community numbering perhaps 75 at any given time abided on the Aleutian island of Anangula for the least 500 years during the 7th millennium BC. That is longer than the Roman Empire would last, and longer so far than any settlement of European descendants in what they were taught to call the New World. The Anangulans might have stayed even longer had they not been driven away when volcanic ash blanketed their domain in 6,250 BC. They lived in small semi-subterranean houses built of driftwood frames covered with living sod. Evidently there was a strict division of labor. The women preferred domestic work such as sewing animal skin clothing, while the men spent daylight hours on the roofs making stone tools and weapons. As they watched for marine mammals and other game, their descendants were the Aleut who settled on the Aleutian Islands and part of the Alaskan mainland. Closely related by language and facing similar challenges were the Inuit, known to whites as Eskimos. I heard that that's not a very good word, but what do I know? I don't know most things. So there's this illustration here. Carved perhaps 2,000 years ago, this ivory harpoon tailpiece typified an Inuit tradition, fashioning tools that were also works of art. What's this here? And this, I think, is about this picture at the bottom. The Thule people of Skraeling Island built sunken whale rib and sod houses when the weather grew too bitter for tents. Polar bear skins, stretched out to dry, were used for clothing. The bowhead whale being butchered would feed several families through the winter. The distinctive culture that gradually developed in this region was fed by two main tributaries, both of which emerged around 4000 BC, the Norton tradition, spreading out from Norton Sound along Alaska's perimeter, and the Dorset tradition named after Cape Dorset, one of the culture's major sites. Reaching eastward from the Mackenzie River, the Norton people used stone lamps to burn oil for heat and light. They contrived the first toggle harpoons, which they hurled at seals and other marine mammals from the light. Maneuverable kayaks they built to ply the frigid coastal waters. At about the same time as the Canadian glaciers were retreated, Dorset people moved into the virgin territory of the new coasts and subsequently moved eastward all the way to the Atlantic and Greenland. They lived in all manner of dwellings, pit houses, sod houses, and skin tents stretched tight over animal bone frames. They were apparently conservative in their hunting, however taking only caribou and seals. This specialized hunting may have been detrimental, because around AD 1000, the Dorset people gave way to the Thule culture, which lasted 700 years, starting on Siberian and Bering Sea islands. Thule hunters built seagoing boats and broadened their hunting repertoire to take whales, big seals, and walrus, and became so successful that their way of life spread clear across the Arctic to Thule, Greenland, from which their culture later derived its name. In due course, the Thule people with shared customs and essentially the same language, inhabited coastlines spanning 6,000 miles. Their descendants would continue to use common knowledge from Siberia to Greenland well into modern times. There's this picture here. Emblem of the vast subarctic, the migratory caribou were an indispensable source of food and hides for people scattered across the far north. That's the caribou. And below, wooden snow goggles of the Thule culture, AD 1000 to 1700, prevented snow blindness during hunting. Below right, a handle of horn or wood fill fitted with a sharpened slate blade produced the versatile ulu used for cutting and scraping. So that's these ones here. So a demanding Arctic environment would seem to have left no place for artistic expression. For centuries, the Aleuts and Inuits' ancestors brought extraordinary care and skill to virtually everything they made, achieving high artistry in their weapons, implements, and accessories. A keen sense of beauty, even in everyday objects, was everywhere apparent. Wooden goggles that enabled a hunter to see in the blazing sun of an ice field took on a design that transcended their utility. So too, a scratcher made of a seal's claw and used to coax live seals out of fighting had to be pleasing in form. Likewise, ivory toggles that linked to loops of leather thongs. Knots were not used because they could not be untied when frozen. Most objects were decorated, and many took forms that are recognizable 100 generations later. Buttons shaped like animals, for instance. Typically, every adornment had an animal motif in order to please the animal spirit, or Inua. The Inuas were known to dislike ugliness, and the spirit of a bird or seal that was slain by an ill-crafted weapon would carry that message to its kind in the spirit world. If, however, an animal was killed with a fine weapon, the beast's spirit would return in the body of a similar animal and repopulate the earth. In the dangerous north, beauty may have been a form of insurance against weapons that might fail. Thus, the higher the degree of aesthetics, the more food at hand. The subarctic world, the subarctic wilds. Inland from the northern coast, the landscape rolls out into the vast subarctic, a transition zone embracing some 2 million square miles of mountains, lakes, marshes, forests, and tundra. This immense realm gradually came to be inhabited by members of two very different linguistic families. Athabascan speakers to the west of Hudson Bay, and Algonquian speakers to the east. The Athabascans, descendants of an ethnically distinct people called the Nadene, appear to have established themselves in the area relatively late, though still before the last wave of migrants from Asia spread across the Arctic. They may have returned northward after reaching more southern regions of the Canadian plains. As if anticipating the successful Thule strategy, the Athabascans hunted whatever came their way, in particular the caribou. In this harsh region, animal populations fluctuate widely from year to year, and in order to survive, the people of the subarctic became adept in hunting all of them in their seasons. Over time, the ancestral Nadene continued to disperse. Some moved into the North Pacific Northwest, giving rise to such peoples as the Haida, Tlingit, and Hoopa. Other Nadene went farther south, late in the prehistoric period. To this day, the Athabascan language family is represented in the southwest by the Navajo and Apache. So there's this picture here. Dancing figures from a 1,000-year-old pot attest to the artful touch that the Hohokam brought to the making of pottery. The West. The people went through 4 worlds before they walked up a reed from the bottom of the lake of changing waters into the present world. First man and first woman led the others, and with them came their 2 first children, the changing twins. One took some clay from the stream bed in his hand and shaped itself into a food bowl. The other twin found reeds growing, and with them he shaped a water basket. Then they picked up stones from the ground, and the pieces became axes and hammers, knives and spear points in their hands. Last of all, the twins shaped digging sticks from branches of mountain mahogany, and hoes from deer shoulder blades. They found the Kisani, a different people, growing gardens in the valleys, and the people traded their tools and baskets, and bowls and weapons for seeds to plant in their own places along the rivers. They learned how to build dams and spread the water on dry ground where it was needed. Navajo creation story. So, I'm gonna get some more tea. To survive in a desert world, people must ration water, as the ancestors of the Paiute did, while inhabiting an inhospitable realm and pursuing a life that hardly changed in the course of a few thousand years before Europeans came. To thrive in the desert, people must manage water on a large scale through engineering. To be an engineer is to be a builder, as the Hohokam surely were 2,000 years ago, when they built a system of canals that the city of Phoenix mimicked when it built its modern waterworks. To be builders, people must erect things that outlast them, as the Anasazi surely did in the prehistoric cities at Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon. To build a city is to be a governor, a manager, a merchant, a farmer. It means surrendering the liberties of hunting and gathering as a way of life in exchange for the luxuries of settlement. Thus the arid conditions of the Southwest, rather than discouraging the growth of large settled communities, seem to spur development, having mastered the problem of water supply for drinking and irrigation. The people of the Southwest stood on the brink of thriving culture and urban living. Farming in this part of the Americas, at least on a scale that allowed permanent settlement, evidently appeared first in Mexico around 3,500 years ago, yet the domestication of crops began long before, and must have occurred widely in small, slow increments over the centuries. Between mastodon kills, for instance, Clovis hunters took small animals when they could, as the Arctic hunters of walrus and polar bear stalked field mice, and doubtless they gathered fruits, roots, and legumes in season as well. During the pre-agricultural period in the Southwest, bands of nomads remembered where they had found piñon nuts and returned regularly to those places. As they discovered edible wild plants, they must have encouraged their growth or dispersal, even inadvertently, as squirrels encourage oak forests when they bury acorns. Among the early plants to be nurtured systematically were squash, beans, and avocado. Even prickly pears were planted, evidently in hedges, for protection and as a source of seasonal fruit. Corn came later with the domestication of a wild grass called teosinte, which developed into maize in its many varieties, each suited to a different habitat. The implication of these changes were enormous. The cultivation of crops provided larger larger yields than foraging, and larger food supplies supported higher population densities, which led to social specialization and stratification, which in turn encouraged dependency on the higher food production provided by people who became farmers. So I'll leave it at that today. I'll continue in another video because I'll be reading more of these books this month. Yeah. So thank you for watching my videos. Hope you enjoyed that a little bit, and hope it helped you fall asleep. Yeah, thank you for watching my videos.